Thank you, everyone, for joining. It's always such a pleasure to do these meetings, even if they're virtual, because we get a chance to connect. So today is an important day for us. We will be releasing our State of India's Environment Report in figures. It's a report that we do annually, and I will talk a little bit about it before I hand over to my colleague, Rajit Sengupta and Kiran Divedi to take us through the key findings. But before I speak a little bit about the report, it would be good to formally release it in the company of all our friends. So, Rajit, if you could put the book out and for people to. The screen is to be, yes. So thank you. This is our State of India's Environment Report in figures, which you can also access on our store on the Down to Earth site, and we will tell you what we have found in this. But thank you, Rajit. Thank you, Kiran, for this. And simultaneously, I also want to show you a copy of Down to Earth. This is our Hindi edition of Down to Earth, which also has the key findings of the State of India's Environment Report in figures. So both reports are now public and available to all of you. I hope you will use them. I hope they will be of interest. So what is our State of India's Environment Report in figures, and how does it differ from the report that we do at the beginning of the year, which is called the State of India's Environment Report? This is a report that we do annually now, which my colleague Rajit Sengupta, Kiran, and Richard Mahapatra, they put together each year as a report which gives you the state of the environment, but through data, through numbers. Now, we strongly believe that numbers are very important because numbers are about what you measure is what you know. And also we know that what you measure is what you act on. So if you're looking at an action agenda, then that comes out of the numbers, that the data and the analysis of the data in terms of the trend that is emerging, the state of the environment as it is emerging, and what needs to be done. Now, this is particularly important in this year, 2024. We are at the cusp of two major events. On June 5th, next week, is the World Environment Day, when the world celebrates the idea of the importance of environment and sets an agenda moving ahead. But more than that, it is also the cusp of the election results coming out. June 4th is the day India will know its results of its election. And as far as we are concerned at CSE, if it's the new government or the old new government, it's a time to commit to an agenda moving forward. Now, there are two key lessons that come out of the report, which Rajit and Kiran will discuss with you. One, what is very clear is that whatever that agenda and the agenda that we frame moving forward has to be framed in the context of climate change. We know today that climate change is absolutely urgent. When I speak to you today, Delhi has 50 degrees centigrade in terms of temperature. And it's not just Delhi, it's across India, it's across vast parts of the world. Now, this is heat close to reaching beyond tolerance levels of human beings. It's also not surprising why we have it. We've allowed emissions to increase. And as a result of each year, the world breaks the record when it comes to heat levels. It's the same. It's also not just heat. We are seeing floods. We are seeing cyclones, intensification of cyclonic activity. So we reel between floods, between droughts, between other extreme weather events. Now, all that is key in the setting of the agenda moving forward, because each one of these disasters takes away the development dividend. It leaves us poorer. And that's why the agenda must be framed in the context of climate change. The other very important context is, what is the agenda? How far have we reached on it? Where is it that we need to focus more? Now, whatever the gaps in information and data that exist, we have tried our level best to understand what is the state of art, what is happening in the states in terms of development. What are the key parameters when it comes to energy, when it comes to water, when it comes to electric vehicles? What do we know? And that helps us to set the agenda moving forward. So to me, this report is key at this time, both in terms of understanding the state of art, but also using that data to to sharpen the focus of what we need to do moving forward. So with those words, let me invite Rajat, who has put this report together with Kiran, and it's a remarkable piece of work. But please go ahead.
Yep. Am I audible?
Yes.
Perfect. And is my screen visible as well?
Now it is, yes.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. So State of India's environment in figures is an attempt to look at all the data points that have been released over the past 1 year. We look at government data sets and we look at other credible sources as well to understand the key parameters in the perspective of climate change, in the perspective of development, in the perspective of health, and all the other metrics that go along with it, and understand whether India has actually made progress or not. We've been doing it for the past 7 years. So picking up from where ma'am left, so the first thing that we have talked about, so I will take you through some of the highlights of the book. The first thing that we have talked about is the state of extreme weather events in India. So since 2022, we have been documenting the number of days India is experiencing extreme weather events. So it's been 2 years that we've been looking at it. And for 2023, so the entire year of 2023, out of the 365 days, some part of the country was experiencing an extreme weather event on 318 days. And this is marginally higher than what was the case in 2022, which was 314. We also found that all 36 states and union territories reported at least 1 day of extreme weather events, which highlights the fact that none of the parts of the country are completely immune to climate change, and that it is all pervasive, and that we all should take note of it. And what we also found in terms of loss and damage, these numbers are what are available in the public domain for the loss and damage. The actual estimates we think would be much higher, but this gives you an idea of how big the crisis is. So we found that in 2023, 3,287 people died due to extreme weather events. And this is an increase of 8% over the previous year. We also realized that crop area that was damaged, it was to the tune of 2.21 million hectares. And it is also marginally higher than last year, which was around 1.96 million. We also looked at the first 3 months of 2024. So we looked at January, February, and March. And this is the time period when the heat stress has not really started. Despite that, what we found that 12 states and union territories in the country reported the highest number of days with extreme weather events in those 3 months compared to the last 2 years. So 12 states and union territories in March, Feb, and January recorded their highest number of extreme weather events in the past 3 years. And I'm confident moving forward, the way things look right now, the number will go up exponentially when we factor in the months of April, May, and thereon. So moving ahead, what we also found in terms of what is happening in climate. So last year, according to IMD, was the second hottest year that India has seen in the past 122 years. So since 1901, this is the second hottest year. And this was because in 2023, we had a warm winter, we had a warm monsoon period, and we also had warm post-monsoon period. So what it effectively means is that last year, only the 3 months between March, April, so just before the monsoon, those 3 months were somewhat near to the average. Rest of the entire year, India was experiencing a hotter than usual temperature. We also found that the minimum temperature last year was the highest. So in terms of the average temperature, India was the second hottest ever. And in terms of the minimum temperature, which is usually the night temperature, so the minimum temperature was the highest India has ever seen. And it peaked in December. So in December, if you look at the minimum temperature, so we have got the maximum temperature, the average, and the minimum temperature. So the minimum temperature was 1.71 degrees Celsius above the normal period that India considers, which is, I think, around which is the average of 1981 to 2010 data. So the minimum temperature in December was 1.7 degrees warmer than the average. And this is obviously the highest ever in 122 years. We also found that across throughout 2023, 102 weather monitoring stations of IMD, which were spread across 26 UTs and states, they shattered their monthly 24-hour temperature, high temperature, or the maximum temperature. So they shattered that. So 102 weather stations across India, they saw their monthly record-breaking temperature in 24 hours. And similarly, when we look at rainfall, it was across 69 stations in India. And if you look at it, these 69 were spread across 23 states and union territories. So in 24 hours, these areas received a lot more than what they normally do in that season. So that is what is alarming. From there on, what we tried to do in the book was to understand what is the progress states have made so far. So we identified 14 indicators, which are spread across 7 different parameters. So the indicators were to the tune of, so we looked at the social sector expenditure of the government in 2022-23. Social sector is an umbrella term which looks at education, which looks at healthcare, which looks at the developmental costs or the investments that the government makes. So we looked at how much money has been spent on that. We have looked at under the health parameters, we've looked at the per capita total health expenditure in 2019-20. That was the most recent number that was released last year. We also looked at the estimated number of deaths that have happened in India in 2021, which is also the most recent numbers that are available, released earlier this year. And within the number of deaths, we tried to understand what were the primary causes behind it. So we looked at how many deaths were due to communicable diseases, because of non-communicable diseases, because of COVID-19 pandemic and related issues. And also there is also injuries, which is a smaller portion of the total deaths that happen in India. Further, we also looked at the drinking water. So within drinking water, we looked at the performance of Jal Jeevan Mission. So we looked at how much percentage of rural households in individual states and UTs have direct tapped water supply. We also looked at how much percentage of the samples that are tested, drinking water samples that have been tested within Jal Jeevan Mission, how many of them are contaminated. So basically, drinking water contamination is another parameter that we looked at. Then within agriculture, we looked at 2 parameters. One was the area that is insured, the farm area that is insured under Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana. And we also looked at whether it is going up and down. And we also looked at the soil health of the country. Then we also looked at air pollution. We also looked at transport, where we looked at the uptake of EVs in the total registered vehicles in 2023-24. So of all the cars that have cars, or all the vehicles rather, that have been registered in the state in the past 1 year, how much of that share was electric vehicle? And then finally, we also looked at energy. Within the energy, we looked at the renewable energy generation that happened last year. And in this renewable energy, we also include hydropower projects as well, because CEA, the data that it comes out with, it also mentions hydropower projects within the renewable scheme. New renewable schemes, energy is different. So this includes hydropower projects as well. And then the percentage change over 22-23. And we also looked at the per capita power availability and the distribution losses that are happening while giving out electricity to the people. So what we found, the highlights, so you can look at the book, and each state government, how they're performing, and each UT, how they're performing, it is mentioned over there. But what we found is that generally, low per capita health expenditure is something that is there. So most states and UTs have this problem. India itself has a very low per capita health expenditure compared to the global standards. We also found that there's a very high burden of non-communicable diseases. So bulk of the deaths that are happening in India is because of NCDs. We also found that compared to the last year, the renewable energy generation had actually gone down in several states and UTs. And finally, we also realized that there is an insufficient crop insurance coverage that is there. What we also found is that roughly around 12 to 16 states have already stopped uh, implementing Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana in their areas, which includes states like Punjab, Gujarat. So that basically shows that our farmers are not really prepared for any onslaught due to extreme weather events. And we also realized that the general soil health, the three macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they are low in most of the states in UT. We also realized that most of the union territories have serious data caps when it comes to all of these parameters. And the problem with that is we can't really plan and prepare. And as ma'am was saying, we can't really set an agenda if we don't have credible data to work with. So this is what we found when we were looking at the state of states. Then we looked at the greenhouse gas inventory that was released last year by India for 2019. And what we found over there is that while India's overall emissions in 2019 increased by 158% since 1994. So that was the data point that was available over there. Energy sector obviously was the primary source with 76%. And what we also realize is a large chunk of this is still fossil fuel combustion. We also found that agriculture was the second largest emitter in India at 13%. So you can look at the difference. And what we also were very happy to see was that agriculture's share in the total emissions has actually declined since 1994. So it is now 13% as against to 28.3% in 1994. It doesn't mean that the total emissions of agriculture has gone down. It just means that energy and the other sectors are expanding at a higher rate. So the other two sectors were industrial process and product use and waste, and their contributions are also there. In terms of when we look at the kind of greenhouse gases that are being emitted, we've just looked at, over here, the three primary ones. So carbon dioxide is around 79% of the total emissions in 2019. Methane and nitrous oxide were 13 and 5% respectively. Then we also looked at, and this is a very, very good CAC study that has been done. So we were trying to understand. So on the one hand, it is becoming extremely clear that temperatures are rising across India, but we generally feel it pinches people in urban areas much more. So we wanted to understand whether there's a link between the two. So what CAC did was they identified 9 different cities of India. And these cities were identified on the basis of different climatic conditions and population size. And to identify the correlation between the heat that is available over there, or the temperature rise over there, and the green and blue cover, whether that's going down, the vegetation and the water bodies that are going down. So what they found out of the 9 cities that were analyzed, so the time period is between 2014 and 2023. 7 of the 9 analyzed cities saw more than 90% of their geographical area under extreme heat. So if you look on the right, these maps, they basically show you how much of these. So this is Kolkata, which is in these 9, one of the better off. Then there is Pune and others. So you can see how much of the geographical area, when it is peaking, how much of it is exposed to extreme heat. We also looked at, we also realized while doing the research that a curious kind of a problem is emerging. So on the one hand, temperatures are rising. On the other hand, humidity levels are also going up. So logically, when we were growing up, or even otherwise, if we think about it, we think humidity levels is a good thing. It keeps the temperatures in a way under control. But what we've realized is that because of the humidity, sweating becomes more difficult, and it basically hinders. So the impact or the onslaught of extreme temperature gets amplified because of high levels of humidity, which is happening right now. So it is basically, in a way, stopping the body from naturally cooling itself. And we also realize that the vegetation and the water bodies have been shrinking in these places, and they've shrunk a lot in these nine cities as well. So this is something which gives you an idea of what kind of urban planning is required moving forward. Then we did an analysis of the thermal power plants. What we were trying to understand is, so India is and continues and at least for a couple of more years will have a high dependency on thermal plants or on coal. for meeting its electricity needs. So we wanted to understand, so SO2 is one of the primary pollutants that comes out of the thermal power plants. So we wanted to understand if power plants are conforming with the standards that exist in India. And there has been a long discussion on that. India has an SO2 standard that has been there for a while now. So we looked at the installed capacity of the power plants, and what we found was that only 16% of the 606 thermal plant units that for which data was available publicly were meeting the standards. And these 16 units, so one power plant can have multiple units within them. So these 16 units collectively account for 12% of the total thermal installed capacity in the country. So it basically means out of 100% of the installed capacity, only 12% are conforming with the SO2 standards. Moving forward, what we also looked at, we went a step further. So most of these states and UTs, a certain amount of the capacity is allocated to them. So when we looked at that, we realized that from these thermal plants, so a big thermal plant might give the installed capacity can be allocated to multiple states, and small power plants would be to single state itself. So when we looked at it in terms of how much of these power plants are allocated to states, so within that, we found that only 9% of the allocated capacity was adhering to SO2 standards. It's lower than what is the total installed capacity. So that is also something that we found when we were looking at the numbers. And then we moved on to state of health. So we were looking at the kind of mortality that happened in India in 2021. And we realized it's just 3 diseases. So cardiovascular diseases, which is a disease, which is a non-communicable disease, respiratory and infectious and tuberculosis, which is a communicable disease. And the third is chronic respiratory diseases. These 3 diseases accounted for 60% of all deaths that happened in India in 2021. So just 3 diseases, out of which 2 are non-communicable diseases, accounted for 60% of all deaths that happened in India in 2021. We also found out that air pollution continues to be the leading risk factor for fatal diseases. So air pollution is one of the, which makes sense because chronic respiratory diseases is one of the 3 things over there. Even it impacts the cardiovascular diseases as well. So air pollution is the primary risk factor for fatal diseases in 22 states and UTs. Further, what we also realized, even though waterborne diseases, the general share in the overall India's overall deaths is much lower, India continues to account for 41% of the global deaths due to waterborne diseases. So that is another point that we realized, which is a problem with sanitation, and these are all avoidable deaths to a great extent if we are able to fix our sanitation and water problems correctly. Now I will give the screen over to Kiran Pandey. She will take you to through the remaining slides that are there. Kiran, I'll just share your screen and then you can take over. Kiran, over to you.
Thanks, Rajat. Thanks, and look forward, Kiran, to your presentation.
Thank you, Rajat. So now I will start from where Rajat ended, and especially I'll talk about air and how it impacts us. He said that air is a major risk factor in 22 states, and therefore we thought, let's take a look at the air quality in our country. And so we have considered an analysis of air quality in our country done during the winter season by CSE's air pollution team. And what we found was that the North and East India remained the most polluted region with an average PM2.5 level of 89.9 micrograms per cubic meter. And interesting, South India had the cleanest air as per our analysis, and this is during the winter season. At the same time, our capital city, Delhi and Chandigarh, the UT, were the most polluted UTs in our country, and Bihar and Haryana were the highest polluted amongst the states as per our analysis. Interestingly, we also analyzed the small towns, which are the problematic towns, and we often ignore them. And what we found was that the small towns in Karnataka and the Northeast were cleanest in the winter months. And Mysuru, a famous tourist place, was the cleanest city amongst the small towns.
Smaller towns, not small towns. Huh? Okay. Mysuru is not a small town, smaller town, smaller than Delhi.
Okay. And And at and air is linked to the transport. And so we thought, let's also analyze the state of transport in our country. And we had specifically looked at the state of public transport in the country. And we were surprised to find that, in fact, it was worrying to find that between 1951 and 2020, the share of buses in the total registered vehicles has dipped down significantly. It has dipped down from 11.1% in 1951 to 0.07% in 2020. This is a huge dip in our public transport, the buses that is critical for public transport systems in our country. And it is important to address the quality of air and the mobility as well. At the same time, we also analyzed the buses operated by the state road transport undertakings across our country. And what we found was almost 25% of buses that these SRTs operate are overaged, and these need replacement. At the same time, just 8 undertakings were profitable. That means the rest were loss-making transport undertakings. And we need to address that going forward. Another interesting aspect that we thought it's very relevant, very timely, is the EV vehicles. Countries considering EV vehicles and their potential, and therefore the EV adoption is on the rise. Interestingly, between 2021 to 22 and 22-24, the total number of share of electric vehicles registered has jumped from 2.5% in 2021 to 22 to 6.83% of total registrations. That means, yes, the EV vehicles are getting, that's an area that that it's rising. It has a potential, but at the same time, it has made no impact on diesel vehicle registrations, which means the number of diesel vehicle registrations has remained steady at around 11% in the last 3 years. And I think this needs to be addressed because diesel is a polluting fuel and also impacts on health. We also took a look at is the share of buses, which comes under heavy passenger vehicles, rising. But the share of heavy passenger vehicles, which includes the buses, is negligible. However, there are few states where it is getting picked up. For example, Delhi and Karnataka, they are among the topmost states in terms of adopting electric vehicles in their public transport systems. But it is negligible. And if we want to address air quality and the mobility issues, we need to also consider the potential of electric vehicles, which can contribute a lot to improving India's air quality. And another important aspect that we considered while talking about the cities is the state of waste. And what we found was that every day over 30,000 tons, this is around 21% of the total waste that remains unprocessed in our country. And where it goes, it actually ends up in the landfills. And so what happens is that the number of dump sites with legacy waste has gone up in 16 states in just a year. At the same time, just 17% of this legacy waste we're able to deal with. And yet, yes, there are plans to address another 26%. But this issue of landfills and dump sites is actually very critical if you talk about managing India's waste. And we also took a look at what is being done to address the illegal use of plastics in the country. And so there's an app developed by CPCB. This app is used to report the illegal use of plastics. But the redressal rate of this application to report the illegal use of plastics has dipped down to 19% in May 2024, as compared from 25% in March 2023. That means, although we have an application that can be used to report data on illegal use of plastics, but it is not being utilized optimally and needs to be used properly. So when we talk about these issues, we can't leave biodiversity. And in that, we have considered the state of forest land diversion in the country. And what we found was that in 22-23, we are talking about the data that is available in the public domain till August 2023. The diversion of forest land for non-forestry use has increased by 3.5%. And of this, with half of this is having just occurring in just 5 states of the country. At the same time, there's another important issue that is in the news this year. It's about forest fires. And there has been a significant rise in forest fires. But what we looked at is the large forest fires. And we found that 13 states had seen a rise in large forest fires. And obviously, these included Himachal and Uttarakhand. And this was a surprising element for us. And when we further took a deep down into these 2 states, these are all Himalayan states. And amongst these, Himachal Pradesh had seen a rise in large forest fires for almost 7 times. And in Uttarakhand, it was more than 2.5 times. The book has the details about these forest fires state-wise. We also looked at the conflicts between man-animal conflicts. The book has data on elephants and tigers, the conflict on those animals. Interestingly, we had a look at the leopard populations, the population of leopard in our country. The number of leopards has gone up. But what is worrying is that over half of this is outside the reserves, which means this is also an important reason for the increasing man-animal conflicts due to leopards in our country. So when we talk about the increasing population, it looks like a good news. But if you go deep down to the data sets, you find that if half of this is outside the reserves, that means the states are vulnerable to conflict due to these leopard populations. Every year, our book looks at how is the court performing in context of dealing with the cases concerning environmental crimes. And what we found was this time, the crimes under the Environmental Protection Act have increased by 30.6% from 2021 to 2022. So what does this mean? This means that at this rate, the courts will take around 34 years at least to clear the existing backlog at the current rate. And again, the book has detailed insights on this, on 7 different aspects of these environmental cases in our country. You can take a look at this in the book. The protest by farmers has been driving the media headlines every day, especially in the last few months. And so we have analyzed the farmers' protests in the country from January 2023 to March 2024. And the general narrative that we found in the media was around the MSPs. And so it was thought that the distress is just around MSPs. But when we took a deep down into these, the media reports that we collected from all leading national and regional newspapers, we found that the protests are happening across the country. Across at least 22 states reported these protests during this period. And the protests were not just around MSPs, they were beyond the MSPs. So a report takes the narrative beyond the MSPs in terms of farmers' distress in our country. For example, the report says that most of the protests have been around land acquisition for infrastructure developments. They're around the poor agri-infrastructure for our farmers, which means the need for better irrigation setup, better electricity supply for the farmers. And this is a major finding that the report is coming out with. Secondly, we also took a look at the organic agriculture in the country. And so what we found was that although the area certified for organic cultivation has increased, but the total organic crop production has decreased by over 15% in the 3 years. That means the scheme is not working as it was meant for. So this needs to be looked at. How do you do this?
Go ahead, Kiran.
Yeah. Another interesting report that came out this year was on the state of micro irrigation schemes in the country. This report has come out after 5 years, and it's an important report. And we have analyzed this to see the state of micro irrigation schemes in the country. And what we found was that although there's been rise in the schemes by a 6.5% between 2013-14 to 2017-18, but the capacity to irrigate, that means their overall irrigation potential has declined by nearly 1%. At the same time, another interesting finding that came out from the report was that most of these schemes are owned by the small and marginal farmers. And they also bear the cost of these schemes. In fact, half of these schemes are funded by the farmers' own savings, and this is of concern. So these are all small and marginal farmers, and this fact often gets overlooked. So we thought let's also highlight this aspect in the report. At the same time, this section also has a chapter on the groundwater schemes. Groundwater extraction in the country, and we found that around so although there's been some good news in terms of groundwater dependence in the country, so it has slightly improved, which means there have been some improvement in terms of how India depends on groundwater. But when you go deeper into the data set at state level, you find that 17 states or UTs have overexploited locations. That means they extract more water than they recharge. And so just the national figure is not a good indicator if you talk about groundwater dependence in the country. We need to look at this from the state level perspective as well. And another interesting aspect that we thought we should not leave out is the state of employment in the country. This is important in context of the pandemic. When the pandemic was there, we heard that there was migration happening to the villages. Okay, people were going back to villages because there were no jobs in the country. And but now the trend, and this is an interesting trend that we found, was that during the pandemic, many people were pushed back to farming. And what this means is that there has been a growth in the agriculture sector employment, and this is the first ever increase since 2000. So this slide over here that you see, this clearly shows the growth in the agriculture sector. Earlier there was a negative growth, but now this is on the rise. And also, we generally feel that the formal sector is a good sector in terms of employment. But what is worrying is that there has been increasing informalization of the formal sector. So what does that mean? That means all the people are working in the sector, but most of them, which means around over 60% of the people, are working without contracts and social security benefits. And this is, again, an important aspect, because the general perception is that if people are working in formal sector, things are all well. But I think we need to take a look at this nature of formal sector. And there's also some good news in the report, and that is in terms of southern states. So what we found was that the share of regular and organized sector employment and the high-skilled jobs is highest in southern and western regions. And this map really shows that the southern states. And this is interesting. And by high-skilled jobs, we mean that this includes all the high-tech, the IT sector jobs, and all the secure jobs. That means southern regions are pretty well off in terms of employment. Although this is, we need to further work on this. But nevertheless, if you compare it at all India level, southern states are definitely doing better than the other states in the country. And the last point we want to make is that the country is a young country, but around 83% of the unemployed population is young. What's even worrying is amongst this, 66% of these are educated but unemployed people. And this is a crisis. This is a state of employment that needs to be addressed, especially if you're worried about the youth in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you very much. So, I've been going through the questions that are on the site, and I was wondering, and I basically would like to answer two things that are very important that many have asked. And maybe both you, Kiran and Rajit, can explain this. I think the most important thing that people have asked is, what are the sources of your data? Now, it's important for us to explain to everyone who's present with us today is that all this data is government data sources and agencies of the government which produce the data, or CSE colleagues who have used the government data to analyze the trends that are coming out. But and maybe Rajit, what you could help everyone is to understand, and if you can show them on the screen, what are the sources of data? Because the idea here is we cannot do these primary surveys. We are not here. And somebody has asked us, is this primary data collection from CSE? No, this is a collation. It's essentially the use of data to present to you the trends that emerge. So for instance, Rajat, the
Yes.
data that you have presented on extreme weather events, tell us where it comes from. And
So-
if you can take us through some of the other data sources.
I'll just share my screen and I'll just take
Yeah.
through. So this is the extreme weather database that we have been looking at since 2022. We look at 3 data sources. The first and primary is the India Meteorological Department. So they come up with daily and monthly reports. So from the daily reports, we identify which are the areas in the country which have experienced an extreme weather event. Then in the monthly report, we cross-check the daily numbers. Along with that, in the monthly report, on some of the months, they also come up with the loss and damage data. So we collate the loss and damage. So there are 2 components. One is which are the days when extreme weather events happen. The other is what was the loss and damage that came along with it. So IMD data source is used for this. Then we also look at the NDM data, that is National Disaster Management Division under the Ministry of Home Affairs. So Ministry of Home Affairs is responsible for loss and damage and or for the rescue operations when an extreme weather event happens. So this department NDM data, they come up with loss and damage data on a daily basis during the monsoon. So it starts just before the monsoon season and it goes till about the end of monsoon. So for those four months, we get regular data from NDM. So that is another data point that we use to identify the loss and damage. And finally, we also look at media reports. So there are some of the events like snowfall, deaths due to snowfall events, deaths due to cloud bursts. So for these, we also look at media reports. So we basically collect all of these. So IMD for identifying the days with extreme weather events, and then media reports to look at the loss and damage information around it. So that is how we collate the extreme weather database data. Then if we move on to this climate, this is all IMD data. This entire slide about how temperature is rising. So if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, so this is basically from 1901 till 2023. Each of these bars talk about the anomaly. So this is all IMD data. And if you look at it, the recent years, it just got moved. So the recent years is all red, which basically tells you why we should worry. So on an average, most of these recent years have been red, and this is all IMD data. The different parameters are from different ministry that we picked up. So for the social sector expenditure, we have looked at RBI's comes up with a state report. So from there, we picked up this. So this is based on the state budget estimates that come out. Then we have looked at the per capita total health expenditure from, there's a report called National NIA is the report. National, so this came out. So this is from Ministry of MOHF, Health and Family Welfare. So they came up with this data last year. Jal Jeevan Mission is for all the sanitation and the water related data points. Agriculture is again from ministry. So these are all the state parameters are state government, national government data sets, different website, different ministries taken from different ministries.
Released this year itself.
All of these data points. So
they are comparable as well.
They are comparable and they've been released this year itself. This is again government data. I'll just quickly run through. This is primary data that CSE has collected based on, so European Union has a Copernicus satellite agency. So they have used the satellite data to identify the loss of green areas and water bodies. And they have also used satellite data to identify which of the geographical locations within these cities experienced extreme heat during the summer periods. So this is primary in that sense and non-governmental in that sense. This is completely, this entire data set has been taken from Central CEA, Electricity Authority, right? CEA, Electricity Authority. So they come up with monthly report on the performance of power plants. So we looked at the report from that were released this year. So
in September 2023.
till September 2020, till September 2023.
Yeah.
So we looked at all the monthly reports, we compiled it, and we came out with the average. So on some months, some of the plants were doing better, some of the plants were not doing better. So we looked at the average data over there. So this is also from a government source. And there is also another website called Merit, which is also government portal.
It's a dashboard.
To identify how much of the units were allocating to individual states and UTs. So that allocation is based on the Merit data that was available, and that is also available as a government data source. This is from a non-governmental source. This is a global burden of diseases, which was recently, earlier this month itself, right?
In May itself.
In May itself, it was released. This is by an agency called IHME. So they look at all the countries across the world, and also within India, they look at state-wise data, state-level data. And within this, what they've looked at first the reasons for deaths, and they have also looked at the risk factors that are contributing to the diseases that are causing deaths in India. So this is the data source that we've used over here, because there are no government data sources available on deaths in India. Ma'am, should I stop, or should I take you through?
No, I think essentially you've given a flavor. What
Yes.
you could explain is there was a question on EV vehicles. The EV vehicle data is from the Niti Aayog's dashboard. Do I understand correctly? The bus data that you have is from the Ministry of Transport.
Yes,
They
ma'am.
bring out a report on public buses, and particularly public bus undertakings.
Exactly.
So
Performance of
essentially,
yes, ma'am.
that's right.
Yeah.
So essentially, I think what you're getting very clearly is from my colleagues, and you will see all the sources as you download the report. Our effort is to use data which is available in the public domain, data which is from government sources, because remember the kind of scale of data we're looking for. It's difficult to say that one NGO, another civil society, or even an academic paper can give you the scaling. Now, I think the most important thing that we presented today, which will help states to really look at where their strengths and weaknesses are, is the data that we put together on the state indicators. And the state indicators look at the same sources of information, whether it's the number of electric vehicles that are being registered, whether it is the number of farmers who are insured under the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, whether it's the number of taps that are now available, which are functional taps in villages, or whether you have an unfinished agenda there, whether those groundwater sources are today polluted or not polluted. So the aim that we had was that wherever the data was available at a disaggregated level, at the state level, we also put that together to give you a state picture. So there is a country picture, and then there is a state picture. And I think my hope would be, because a number of you have asked this question, what is this meant for? And it's a very big question. It's a very important question. To me, what it is meant for is for all of you. When CSE puts this data out, our effort is to inform public opinion, is to build perspective, is to build information. Every one of you is important. It is not only for the desk of government, but clearly the effort would be to use these trends to understand where do we stand today. Then what is the agenda as we move forward? Have we really fixed the problem of electric vehicles or not? I mean, this data shows us very clearly that your diesel vehicle registration is still much higher. Tells you also that the number of e-buses that have been registered in the country are still so small that they're not going to make a dent on the horrific problem of both mobility as well as air pollution. So I think that's really the purpose of this data, is to put together the trends, the information as we move ahead, to sharpen the agenda and to put it in the public domain. Now, as governments come back to business, as they come back to work, and they look at what should be the schemes, what should they focus on, I hope this report will help both media, our friends in media, our friends in government to be able to look at that composite picture as it is emerging to say, so where and what do we do? So that's really what I think our effort is. A number of you have also asked, where is the report available? My colleagues have given you a link on where it is available. The presentations are also available on our site. I think that is really what I saw was some of the questions that were asked by people. Rajit, one question that was asked was on environmental crimes.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you explain that, what you have found?
Yes, ma'am. So what we've looked at is so there are 7 major environmental laws or acts that are there in place. So we have looked at the number of cases that went to court, that were already pending from last year, that went to court this year. So that data is available. And then
Now,
from there,
when you talk about court, you're talking about NGT plus the high courts, or
yes,
only NGT?
all the courts, ma'am.
So give us a number. How many cases, environmental cases, went to court in the last year?
486.
Ma'am, it is, I'll just quickly show it to you, ma'am. It is there in, this is the one. Yeah. So ma'am, over here, so the data is for 2022. So the first number, 52,920, these were the number of cases that were pending at the end of 2021. So they again were added onto this year. And adding the new additions, there were 1,39,246 cases total. So new in 2022 and the 52,000 from the last year. So these were the number of cases that they had to deal with. These are the 7 different acts that are there. So one is Indian Forest Act and Forest Conservation Act. Then there is one Wildlife Protection Act, then Environmental Protection Act, then Air and Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. So these are the ones that we're looking at. So what we do is, ma'am, we look at all the cases that have been added. We also look at the rate at which cases under these acts have been pushed out by the courts. So if you look at the Indian Forest Act, on an average, 3.13 cases are disposed of in 1 year by the courts. Similarly, if you move on to Wildlife Protection Act, it is 0.74 cases in a year. So not even one entire case is disposed of in 1 year. Then based on that and the available cases that are there in the courts, we do the calculation to come up with these years. And we also, in the third column, which is, I don't think it will be visible for most of us, but in the third column, we also say that what should actually be the rate if you want to dispose of all of these cases in 1 year. So right now for Indian Forest Act, the rate at which courts are operating is 3.13 cases in 1 year are being disposed of. To clear the backlog in 1 year, it has to increase to 54 cases in 1 year. So that is basically what we're talking about. So the rate is basically calculated on that sense, ma'am.
Now, your source of data for this?
NCRB comes up with this data, ma'am. National
Crime
Records Bureau.
Yes. They come up with the data on the number of cases that have been filed, and they term it as environmental crime because assuming that every case that has been filed in the court, according to NCRB, would therefore be an issue which requires arbitration and a decision, and that's what they look at. So that's excellent. Dipendu and Mr. Pasumani, if you can give your questions in the chat box, it would help me a lot, and I would be able to okay, very short, because I think we have muted everybody. So that is why this thing is a little, if you can just put it in the chat, it'll help me. But otherwise, we'll have to unmute everybody. So I think that's the technical problem we have right now. So please bear with us. This format is not made for question and answers like this. Okay. Sukanya, can you unmute Dipendu ji and Ms.
Sure, I'll do that.
Just very quickly, because we are close to closing now.
Namaskar.
There's also something somebody has asked right now, Rajit, on the data on the waste generation. Now, my understanding is this data on waste generation you've taken from the Central Pollution Control Board, or you've taken from the Ministry of Urban Affairs?
Swachh Bharat Mission Urban, so the dashboard that they have. So the municipal solid waste is from there, and also the legacy waste is from there. The plastic is the CPCB app, mobile application for, so the plastic data is from the mobile application.
We have analyzed that. CSE has analyzed that.
So these are the two. So Swachh Bharat Mission and CPCB, ma'am.
Fine. Yes, Dipenduji, please go ahead.
Ma'am, I have two questions. One is, I don't know, maybe I can overhear. Migrant labor data in this book, any migrant labor data in India?
No, we don't have.
No, this last year we did not get any proper sources of migrant. We have some data in the report on migration, which is available from the global database that is available on migration. But there is no real internal migration data that is available in India. I hope it will be available and we will start collating it.
Okay, ma'am. My second question, due to environment, how many students have been dropped out in India? This information is available in your book.
No, sorry, not available. I don't think anyone have done that kind of an analysis. So thank you. I think good questions, and we'll remember all those. So last question somebody is asking also on waste. SPH website mentions waste segregation quite high, but in reality it is not. So I think, Preeti, if I may just say this, I think it's a very important point you're making. But for this, see, remember, data has to be collected by government and by cities. And there are two major sources of data collection on waste. One is the Central Pollution Control Board, which collects it from state pollution control boards and then collates it. The other is MoHUA, the Ministry of Urban MoHUA, Housing and Urban Affairs. I always get it wrong. MoHUA, which collects it through the Swachh Sarvekshan, which again is collected through data from the cities. Now that is put together, and that obviously gives you a picture what cities are saying. Now, there is no doubt that maybe cities overstate the amount of segregation that is being done, and our own analysis, when we have looked at certain cities which have claimed 100% segregation, is not that it is not the case. But this is where data will keep improving. As this data is available, we need to go back and say, no, but this city is not doing 100% segregation. And that makes it important then for government also to check and to recheck. So there is no doubt that unsegregated waste is still a problem. And this is something that has to be done. So I think overall, there are many questions that people are asking, but these are issues I can go on and talk, but these are really not the purpose of today. Today is not to talk about waste. It's not about to talk about migration. It is not to talk about the agenda. It is to talk about the report that we have put forward to you, which is a state of states report. It is a state of environment report. And in conclusion, what I would really say is that as Mr. Pasumai Prasanna has raised his hand. Sukanya, can we ask him? Can we unmute him? Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very proud to salute these participants who are attending this beautiful conference. I'm happy to participate, one of the participants
Thank
here. On behalf of Green Tamil Nadu Mission, as a representative of our Honorable Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. M.K. Stalin, sir, we are following under the Secretary,
Mr. Prasanna, we will meet some other time and talk about all these issues that you're raising. Right
please,
now, this is not the purpose.
Please,
yes.
one second.
Yes.
Please, can you give me the how to ban plastic bag? Because our government of Tamil Nadu under Secretary Mr. Supriya Sahu IAS is very too much involvement to ban plastic bag.
I know, Supriya wonderful. I can explain this. So maybe I can quickly get an answer on this. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So I would suggest that Tamil Nadu could become the first. Actually, there are other states of India as well. but you need to ban plastic bags completely. You cannot ban plastic bags on the basis of micron. And that is critical. Right now, the plastic carry bag ban is completely unenforceable because it is based on the weight of the bag. And that makes it impossible for city governments to be able to enforce it. If you look at a successful ban, it only happens when there is a complete ban, which also needs that you need alternatives like what you're holding up. Wonderful. So this is what needs to be done in Tamil Nadu, needs to be done across the country. We also need much better regulations on multi-use plastic and on plastic which comes in all our packaging material, but we can discuss that some other time. I want to conclude this. We've run out of time. I want to conclude this. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today and for asking and for being part of this huge journey of CSC at all times. It's wonderful for me, and I think I speak for all my colleagues to know that you're all there with us. I think for us, that's important. It's important to know that you're there, you're listening, you're hearing, you're helping us to take our message forward. And as I said, for us, the State of India's Environment Report and Figures is critical today. It's an important time. We have a new government coming. We have June 5th as the day when we celebrate the World Environment Day. The new government, the old government, will set up an agenda moving forward. That agenda has to be informed by what has worked in the past and what has not worked. The data that we present allows us to make a much more informed public opinion in terms of what is working, what is not, what requires focus, what requires prioritization as governments move ahead. And that is really the purpose of this report. And I hope you will download it. I hope you will read it. I hope you will use it in any way that you can, so that this information is broadcast, we can understand it better, and so we can be a much more informed polity as we move ahead in what is clearly an existential threat of climate change today and the need for development in our countries. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Rajat. Thank you, Kiran. And thank you, Richard, who I can't see on the screen, for all this amazing work, and all the other colleagues at Down to Earth who have put together the infographics, the data, the design. This is very, very carefully presented work to you. And I hope you will find it also as useful as me. Richard, any last words from you before I end?
No, thank you, ma'am. You have put it all, I think. So
It's
every data tells a story, I think, and it's secular. So as you said, what you can measure, you can fix.
What you can measure, you can act on. What you can measure, is part of the agenda. And that is the purpose of this. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, the team. Incredible work done. And I hope this will be useful in setting the agenda as we move ahead. Thank you, everyone, for joining.